What up, Oasis?
Hey.
Hello.
How's it going?
Pretty good.
Yeah, I'm doing well. Yourself?
Yeah.
Doing great.
We're here. Wait, I got a question. What is the most painful injury you've ever had?
Oh,
I'm
man.
just, I was driving a moped once.
Yeah, I've got a couple. Yeah, I crashed my moped freshman year of high school. So I was like, 14, I think is probably how old you are.
Yeah, that sounds
Yeah. And had to go to the ER for like road rash and pretty much laid in my bed for like, God, I would bet almost 2 weeks just letting things scab. And then every time you moved, you like broke scab. It was pretty tough. I watched.
Helmet?
I was wearing a helmet.
Saved his life.
Probably saved my life. Yeah, it did. And there were these two neighbor people who were like doing some yard work. It was in the summer, and they saw me crash, and so they ran over and they helped me like right away because nobody else was around. I don't know what I would have done if I was just like laying in the road, but crazy.
That's wild.
Yeah, and then I fixed the moped up and I drove it for the rest of high school.
Ben, do you have a weird injury?
I broke my arm once riding my bike. I was riding by a bush and grabbed the bush and fell off the bike and broke my arm. And then they took the cast off too early, and I re-fractured it going down a McDonald's slide head first.
Oh.
Yeah.
Dang.
Yeah, that was a good time.
You're just a slow healer?
Yeah, I think so.
Okay.
Yeah, we got some bad bones in this body in multiple ways.
When I was in high school, I played soccer, and I had this game, and like I'm standing in front of this girl, and I know she's probably gonna kick the ball at my face, and she definitely does kick the ball at my face, but I forgot to blink, and I scratched my eyeball.
Oh, yeah.
And the most painful thing I've ever experienced in my life, I then had to wear goggles to gym class for like the next 2
How
weeks.
old were you?
awesome.
How old were you?
I was a freshman in high school.
Oh, yeah.
no.
That's
sounds
when I knew
awesome.
I was never gonna be cool.
That's when you knew?
Are there pictures of these goggles?
Yeah.
I'm sure.
I had to play for like 2 weeks, like all my practices in them and everything. They're just like regular like shooting goggles. But
Yeah.
they
That
didn't
is
fit.
so
Every
tough.
3 steps I had to like push them back up on my face.
See, I have a question though. You said you forgot to blink, as if blinking for
Yeah.
you was an intentional choice.
It's not a reaction?
It wasn't that time.
I feel like that's
you
not
have
that's not
bad
on you though. Like you can't be like,
Oh.
oh, it was my fault. I should have blinked. That's on me.
Do you
Like,
have bad reaction times in general?
I don't know. I think I just did that time. Like it somehow awkwardly hit my face and I just didn't
Oh, no,
close my eyes.
I understand
Yeah.
what
Yeah,
happened.
yeah, we
I'm
get
just
it.
confused by your choice of words, blaming yourself for not closing your eyelids fast. I just don't think that's on you, honestly.
I blame you.
Trying to relieve you of that guilt. Like your body is just made that way. You just couldn't blink that fast.
Hey, yeah, my body is fun. Just got over like a stomach virus. Just been doing its own thing.
I does the gallbladder count?
Oh yeah.
That pain pre it coming out was the worst I've ever had.
What was that last
But it wasn't
year?
an injury. This is my body decaying
Yeah.
and destroying itself.
And now your gallbladder.
That was this year. I got it out this year.
Really?
It's December. It was in February.
Oh,
Or
wow.
March even maybe. Yeah,
That feels like a long time ago.
it was.
Yeah.
I mean, you weren't a dad.
Oh, I wasn't. Life was simpler then.
Hey, we're talking about our body today, and I think in the church, one of the weak areas we have in our theology is how we talk about our body and how we treat our body. I think our culture provides a lot of context of things that we should be doing, which I think has been good to an extent. But over the past couple of years, there's been 2 polarizing sides of like the body positivity movement, which is just like, you're great, don't ever do anything. Just believe in yourself. You're amazing. You're wonderfully made, which part of that is true. And then we've also seen the other polarizing side, which is taking like a ton of supplements, all of this stuff with like probiotics, like a ton of weightlifting, ton of exercise. And so we just wanted to provide context of how like this Christmas season, the birth of Jesus, the life of Jesus actually provides a redemption and a hope to what our body is and how God plans to use it.
Yeah, that's good. I like that.
That's really good.
And so when we talk about discipleship, it's not just like an emotional, spiritual connection to God. It actually is a conforming of our whole entire self. So our body, our heart, our soul, and our mind. It is everything who we are conforming into the pattern of like how God has wired us. And we use this word in the Christmas season called the incarnation, and it refers to the birth of Jesus, but maybe just like a broader definition of the incarnation, what do we see happening in this season with Jesus?
Yeah, he becomes flesh. Incarnation is church language, and we've said before, church language can be helpful because it's helping you to understand the theology of Christ and God's kingdom. Yet in this sense, like incarnation is this word most people, if you're walking on the street, you're like, happy incarnation season. Not going to resonate with many people.
We should start using that.
You should.
That's phenomenal.
Next announcement, we're just going to, hey, welcome to church. We're really glad that we're celebrating the incarnation season together. But incarnation is just to become flesh, to embody something, and that's what Jesus did. In 1 John 1:14, it says the word became flesh and he made his dwelling among us. Like that's the incarnation that we get to celebrate every single December when it comes around.
That's good.
That's Christmas.
Mm-hmm.
I think something powerful about the incarnation is like the word that John uses, dwelling, is actually like translated to tabernacle. And so it shows like the fact that God is willing to come down and like give dignity to the human experience without us having to work up to it. And so like that's part of like the beauty of Christmas is that God is willing to take steps to do what humanity cannot.
Yeah, and even we could talk a lot about the tabernacle here. And if you read through Exodus, if you read through the Old Testament and follow their journey through the tabernacle to the temple, you'll see how much emphasis God placed on that gathering, that dwelling. And really when he's doing that, he's making it holy. He's helping it to be exactly what, and when he does that, when it's constructed in the correct way, his presence dwells there. And so in the same way, when Jesus comes in and he incarnates, when he comes in and he embodies the flesh, like he gives it a sense of holiness, and he's deeming it, he's showing it redeemable. He's showing it has the qualities that God can bring about in a very beautiful way.
Yeah, it's giving it worth, and therefore us worth, but then also it was a necessity to have happen in order for the redemption of the world, which I think is actually really beautiful. And so this combination of like, if the body was important enough to hold God, I mean, just that's how much worth he puts in the body. Like how much more, like how important then should we? Like if Jesus thinks the flesh is important, we therefore should also think flesh is important.
Yeah.
And it's more than just Jesus being a baby. Like the incarnation is every single moment that Jesus lived as a human being, from his conception to his death, even in his resurrection. Like he experienced what it's like to have gas, or like to like get a paper cut, or like to scrape his knee. Like it's every single thing that Jesus experienced as being human.
Well, and some of it is, I think we jump to Hebrews and you say we have a high priest who's willing to empathize with us and our weaknesses because he became like us. And so yes, Jesus lived the human experience and he knew all of temptation. But I like to jump to Luke 2. Like it's probably one of my most like undervalued, just all one-off verses. Luke 2:52, it says, and then Jesus grew in wisdom and stature and in relationship with both God and man. And it's at the end of the Christmas story, so he's talking about what it means for Jesus to be incarnate, and it sums up essentially his entire childhood in one verse. But we look at that, and sometimes we get this picture of Jesus just skipped from birth to adulthood, and he starts ministry, and we also get this picture that Jesus is born and has all the tools necessary that he needs to do the ministry. But Luke 2:52 goes against both of those ideas. That Jesus grew both in wisdom and stature. He developed. That's human language. Like he grew up. He had growing pains, and his height increased, and he put on muscle, and like he grew up, and in wisdom he learned things as he went. He wasn't a baby who all of a sudden knew what it was like to be
that's good.
A carpenter. Like he had to learn the process of being he had to learn what it meant to be a son. He had to learn what it meant to be a brother. Like he grew in wisdom and stature, and then he grew in relationship.
Yeah.
And like that's human too. How much do we, as like, if I look back on my middle school self, I didn't know what it looked like to be in relationship with people, but now I'm growing in that. And Jesus went through this, and never did he sin. He never fell short of that, but there was this developmental maturing process in Jesus, both physically and just like in spiritual authority.
Yeah,
like it's super cool.
And you had a quote that you mentioned earlier.
Yeah, Sam Albury says Jesus became what he valued enough to redeem. He couldn't come for people without coming for their flesh and without coming as flesh. And every time I think about that, so the incarnation, right, it's not just he came as a baby, it's he came as humanity to redeem humanity. And that speaks so much. But also his baptism, like in the baptism of Jesus, what he does is he is not just saying like, this is for you, as in like, you also need to get baptized. It's in the moment of his baptism, he's taken the representation of all of humanity, which needed to happen in order for the sacrifice that he made to actually count for all of humanity. He is taking the place of and needed to in order for us to be saved. And the way he does through flesh, which is just, again, if it's important to him, it has to be important to us.
Well, and you can look even through just Philippians 2 of I think that's the counter argument to this, where not counter argument. I think it's the other side of the coin, I should say better, is like, yes, humanity and flesh had dignity, and he saw it worthy to redeem. And yet when you read Philippians 2, it took incredible humility on part of Jesus to be able to be willing to embody this lesser form and to take up this broken mantle in order to bring about the redemption. Like, it says both sides, both his value of the body and like how broken the body was for him to come to redeem it.
Yeah. Yep. I guess I agree. Sorry, I was trying to think, like, is it worth talking about the idea of humility there? But no, it doesn't fit into this podcast.
That's right.
But maybe along that line, so like we define the incarnation as just like the process of Jesus becoming human and living as a human being.
Yeah.
But how does that then now add purpose to our body today?
Why don't you go first?
Yeah.
Yep.
I think like 1 Corinthians 6 is a place that I look at, and it's Paul writing to a church in Corinth, and he's talking about how like the bodies are a temple of the Holy Spirit, and he says that don't you know you're not your own, you are bought at a price, therefore honor God with your bodies. And so I think physically, like our bodies have been bought at a price, and they have been now given back to us. They have been redeemed and restored. And so one is understanding that when someone gives you something that's beautiful and that is worthy, you treat it differently. And so our bodies is not something that we have full ownership of. It's actually a gift from God, and that should change what we use it for and how we fill it and how we restore it and how we just use it.
That's good. I like that, the language of stewardship.
For sure.
Like the reality of every good and perfect gift is from God. So that which has been given to us, if our body is something that has been bought with a price, not just our salvation, but our whole self, which is what body means, like literally all of you. It's how then do you use that in stewardship to what God has gifted?
I think some people might push back and say, well, then what is mine? Like, if this, my own flesh, is not mine, it's mine to steward. Like, what is mine? How would you guys answer that?
Oh, you can still choose to do whatever you want with it.
No. I'm not saying, like, do they have autonomy over it? We know you have autonomy. Like, I can choose what I do with but like, when it comes to the life I've been given, right? I know maybe I can get on board that my money's not mine, God's given it. I can get like that, like those kind of things. But intrinsically to me is my flesh. Like, I can't choose another body.
No one else has.
Yeah, nobody. This is me,
have.
and we're saying, well, it is, but it's not. It's been purchased. It's loaned back to you to be a good steward of. And so, how do we answer that question of like, if the flesh isn't mine, do I have anything?
I don't know how to answer this without being really negative.
No, I don't think. I think it's honest. Like, no, you don't.
You don't. Yeah,
I think
the reality.
But that's part
in
of like,
selfishness. We think
absolutely.
That is what is ours.
And I think that's what I'm trying to push back against is this mindset that we have to own anything. But there's a beauty that you don't own anything. The only thing you could start to maybe articulate you own is your soul, right? Because that's the intrinsic nature to who you are. It's your mind, your will, and emotions that makes you in your flesh. But like, the fact that you don't own your body doesn't rob you of anything. It empowers you to be able to live in a way that's actually more redeeming of what you've been given. And that's what I think I'm trying to get at is, but I think we push back and it's like, well, shoot, I don't own any, like nothing's mine then. Like even the breath in my lungs isn't mine. No, it's been given to you. What a gift.
Yeah.
I think you're hitting on grace, like our last episode.
Totally.
Like part of grace is the fact that God is the one who sustains our body. Yes, we eat. Yes, we like can feed ourselves, but God is the one who provides all of that. And even through the night when we trust God with our body, he's the one who wakes us up. And so part of understanding that our body is on loan is understanding just how much grace God's actually given us.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
I can't tell you how many times I've gotten like millimeters away from a car accident or someone does something and you're just like, man, it could be like that, how quickly you could lose the flesh that you have. And it is grace. Like it totally is.
That's
or
good.
sickness, like when people around you are sick, are you praying for people who get sick and the grace that you get to receive that you don't walk through that currently? There's a lot of that.
So then our bodies are physical, like vessels that house the Holy Spirit. And so a lot of times, like when we hear about sin, it's something that starts in our heart, but is often carried through our body, like in action. And so when we read the New Testament there in Paul's epistles, there's a lot of dialogues about fleeing from physical sin. And so there's dialogues about like remain holy, like flee from sexual immorality, flee from drunkenness, like even just how we think about how we use our tongue. Like our body is a tool that can lead us into Christ-likeness, and it's also a tool that can lead us into more like physical sin.
Well, we don't realize that there are, like, right before the text that you read in 1 Corinthians 6:19 and 18, it says, flee from sexual immorality. All other sins a person commits are outside the body, but whoever sins sexually sins against their own body. Like, we don't even think of that language, of that idea of like that I can sin against myself as much as sin is against God as well. I don't even know where I was going with that, but just that idea, like we can sin against our own body in that. And so we need to flee from, and yeah, it connects with the being bought with the price for sure.
For sure. And anytime you flee from something, you flee to something.
Yeah.
And that's what Romans 12 was going to take us to. Is
Yeah.
therefore I urge you, brothers and sisters, in view of God's mercy, to offer your bodies as living sacrifice, holy and pleasing to God. This is your true and proper worship. And there we'll talk about how that word there in the Greek, that word bodies, is soma, and it means the whole body. It's a word that encompassed the entire person. And so what Paul is articulating is not just like the physical nature, but a holistic experience of who you are, including your physical body, that you get to offer back to God. And when you do that, when you live completely surrendered to God, that's true and proper worship. It's not if you have your hands raised during a song. It's not if your church attendance is good enough. It's not if you miss quiet times or not. Like, do I live my entire existence surrendered to God? I saw a quote this week just from, I think it was, I don't even know who the person was, but they just said, I want to be unapologetically Christian. And I just have been thinking about that consistently throughout the week. And like just unapologetically for Jesus. Right? And I don't think like knowing some of the person's backstory, I don't think it was brash at all. I think it's this lived out, like just holistically, without like regret, like completely without abandon, sold out in my entirety to Jesus. And that's what it means physically, emotionally, relationally, like
holistically.
Yeah.
It's the idea that, and using different language, it's live your life as though you've actually been brought back from death to life. It's okay if Jesus has redeemed, restored, and is like I've been saved and am being saved. It's then if I believe that and I've surrendered and trusted my life unto him, then I'm going to and should desire to want to live a life I've actually been brought back from death to life, which is offering my whole self as a living sacrifice to God.
I think too, this hits on Philippians 2 that we were talking about earlier. And like, so this Romans 12 passage is saying like, offer your body as a living sacrifice. And that's what Jesus did for us. Like, it wasn't just like his spirit or his will that was offered to us. It was his body on the cross that was offered for us. And then we received like our like new body in return because of that. And so I think kind of like the question we need to go to from here now is like, what does it look like to not just take care of our bodies in a way that's self-help, but in a way to offer our body to God as an act of worship?
You're pointing at me.
Sure.
Ask a question again.
So like, what does it look like? Because I think the temptation is when we hear to offer our body as an act of worship, it's like, I should exercise.
So we think of take care of.
I should, Like, so how do we like move from like the self-help, taking care of offering my body into a form of like discipleship and an apprenticeship towards Jesus in my body?
Yeah. Here's how I'm going to answer the question. And you correct me if I'm wrong. I think a lot of those things look a lot the same.
Probably, yeah.
And it just comes from motive.
Yeah.
Right? Like, I think what self-care or like the cultural version of body empowerment or like physical exercise or like even just health when it comes to culture, so much of that is not inherently wrong. There are things that are so good about that, yet when it comes down to the motive, like that's where you start to really get into what could be corrosive or decaying. And so when it comes to what does it look like for me to physically use my body as an act of worship, I think it is probably eating well. I think it is probably exercising well. I think it is showing up in places that God has called you to be the hands and feet of Jesus. I think it is worshiping well as a part of the congregation. I think it is sharing the gospel with the words you've been given. I think it is using your gifts and talents to glorify your heavenly. Like I think it's all of those things, just rooted back in the sense that I do it because this is what God has called me to.
Yeah, that's good.
Not because this is what I want the reward from.
Yeah, that's good. I think I go back to the creation account. It was man's first full day was a day of rest with God, and the other 6 were created for work. And so it is a healthy balance of both rest and work. So I'm going to use my physical body, not just in working all the time, but in balancing both rest and work. I think I want to do that as a way of worship and need to.
And then is your body capable of doing the work that God's called you to? I think that's part of like how we worship. When I was getting my undergrad done, we had like the example of like, you know, the youth pastor who's like only eats pizza and Mountain Dew and then tries to go to youth camp and then can't do any of the activities with students because he like is like not in shape, like had a terrible diet, like all of these things going on with his body. He physically couldn't shepherd his people because he was physically unwell. And so like trying to find the balance of what does it look like for you to physically take care of yourself so that you can enter those spaces well and be like on mission to the fullest.
How do you encourage those who their body keeps betraying them and want to do that well?
I think that hits like on the second question, because part of the body is the fact that it like we carry like the cause of sin within us. Like the cost of sin is death, and so our bodies are weak and fragile. And so the hope of our body is the fact that there is a resurrection. And I think like that's just the tension that we are called to live in, of like there's an extent to what we can control with our body and the extent of what we can't. And what we can't, we wait and hope for when Jesus comes back.
Well, and I'll add something to that, where it's like, I think what that looks like just is, again, intrinsically discerned or communally discerned through the power of the Holy Spirit of what God looks like for you. Because I think people look at that question and says, well, I can't work out in this way because that's what they do. And I can't eat like that because this is what this is what I want to do. This is what I see other people doing. And so for you to offer your body, it's like maybe you're not a marathoner. Maybe your legs and your body and your lungs and like your physical capabilities don't set you up to be that. That doesn't mean you can't be active in some way. Right? Or like maybe you do struggle with a sickness or a disease. And for this next season or for however long God has you in that, it doesn't look like it used to be, but it doesn't mean that you can't continue. Like for someone struggling with cancer, could it be my act of worship is I'm going to seek the treatment necessary to be able to glorify God with the gifts and it could be. And so no, you don't have the privilege to do what others might be able to, but there's still a like, how do I discern in this season with what I've been given? How do I steward that well?
Yeah, that's good.
So then when we look at what God does to redeem our body, you said in a message a couple weeks ago of just like how God doesn't leave anything behind with the resurrection.
Well, and I grew up with this concept of the resurrection of the body just floating around my Christianity. Like I'd heard of it. I semi understood it. I made a joke that to me it was almost more like zombie apocalyptic than it was like anything beautiful. I was like, how the heck does this? Nobody sat me down and explained to me the theology of resurrection of the body. And so I recite the Apostles' Creed, and I said the words, and I was like, yeah, that happens, but I don't understand why it's important. And when I did, I don't remember who sat me down or what message I listened to, but when it started to click for me, I just found why it was such a beautiful, integral part of what it meant to believe in God's redemptive story. That when you look at creation, he builds this creative order in Genesis 1 and 2 that is perfect. Like, everything he spoke was beautiful and organized and amazing, and man was there to take care of it. And like I heard this week, I read a pastor who described Genesis 3 as not the fall, but the unraveling. And that language is just, it cuts me to my core, because it's like God built this perfect thing, and it's melted and fallen apart and broken in front of our very eyes. And so when you read in Romans and Paul, like the groaning of the earth, like God still cares about his holistic creation. Yeah. He is not just about the human, like we are one day of 6 days of creation, and he still cares about the moon and the sun and the stars and the earth and the plants and the animals. It's different, but he still cares. Yeah. And so when I was reading about that, I was thinking like, okay, if God cares deeply about his whole entire creation, he doesn't just care about my soul. He cares about the body he created for me. And yes, from the moment we are born, we essentially start a process of dying. Like, that's the brokenness of, like, you want to talk about humility of your body? I have a 5-week-old at home, and she can do nothing for herself. Like, the humble nature of when you get to the end of the life and you again have to be cared for, like, that's the brokenness of what we, like, the arc of humility that we're forced to walk upon because of the fragile nature of our bodies. And yet, death is not the end. And yeah, your body might go into the ground. Your body might go into the ground, or you might be cremated, or whatever you choose to do with your body. But God doesn't even let that iota of his creation become unredeemed. Like, the enemy will steal none of God's creation from him unless they choose to walk in that. Right?
That's
like,
good.
That's like, this body I hold, it's not mine. And one day, God, when I give it back to the ground, which I came from, God will buy it back for me again with Jesus' blood, and he will hand it to me in its perfected state that I get to walk in that for eternity. Like, that's the bodily resurrection. It's so beautiful. It's so powerful. And so for the person struggling with cancer, for the person struggling with their weight, for the person struggling with the disorder, for the person, like, right now, yes, you are fragile and you are broken, and the Father's heart breaks alongside of you for his creation, and yet that's never going to be the end of your story with Jesus. Not only can your soul live on in eternity in blissful paradise, but your body will join you in just this It's just so
Yeah,
beautiful.
I think of Philippians 3, where verse 20, 21, right before it, he talks about people who have their eyes on earthly things, allow their stomach to drive them. And so he says, we are citizens of heaven. And so the same God whose power brings everything under his own control will also then transform our lowly bodies into being like his glorious body. Yeah. And so it's just like, okay, how can I be encouraged in this, in sickness, in if my body's betraying, if I can't do the things I want, so I'm going to do what I can. I'm a citizen of heaven. Yeah. To where, and one day there will be a complete transformation that he literally says, Paul says, will transform our lowly bodies so that they will be like Jesus's perfect, resurrected, glorious body. Yeah. So encouraging.
Dude, it's so good.
Yeah.
I heard earlier this week that our bodies are not disposable, but essential to the redemptive plan of God. Without the bodily resurrection, there are things that are left incomplete.
That's good.
And so the fact that God is so intentional enough to not leave anything behind just shows his love for us. And like, it shows that all of who we are is important to him, not just like what's inside of us, but like just all of who we are is important.
Yeah, that's good.
Yeah. And so maybe just like, what are some practical ways this week that we can just step into understanding what's going on in our body and understanding how like to worship with our body?
Yeah, I'll go back to your rest work balance. Yeah. When it comes to your physical nature, like your physical impacts everything too. You don't sleep for an extended period of time, you're going to feel that in your soul, you're going to feel it in your mind, you're going to feel it in your relationships, in your work. And so we have to, as humans, figure out how God has created us to balance this dynamic of work and rest. And so for some of you listening, you need a nap. You need 8 hours of sleep. You need a good meal. You need time with friends. You need to rest. For some of you listening, you got to work.
Yeah, get off.
You got to be diligent in your schoolwork. Yep. You got to be diligent at your job. You got to exercise. You got to do the things that God has given you the gifts to be able to do. And so when you feel that, I've heard the terms burnout and bottom out. So burnout is oftentimes what really gets talked about in culture. It's people who hit the gas pedal too hard for too long and they find themselves just depleted. And that's, I think, probably a majority of people who get that feeling. But that same feeling and the same symptoms also show up in bottom out for the people who just sit on their couch and watch TV or scroll on their phone or don't have a sense of productivity to their life because that's how they were created. Yeah. It still shows up that I'm lethargic. I feel undervalued. I don't feel like I'm they look a lot alike symptomatically, but the causes of some of those are really different.
Yeah. I think with that, I go to Tim Keller defines laziness as resting when you should be working and working when you should be resting. So if you want to bodily worship this week, it's maybe you need I don't know if it's chart out, Matt, whatever it is, like have a awareness of yourself and when should you work and when should you rest? Because if you do either one in the wrong way and wrong time, you're lazy. Yeah.
I think movement is really helpful, even if it's just like a 10-minute walk. I'm an Enneagram 9, so I feel all of my emotions and everything that's going on in my life through physical stress and where like I find tension in my body, but I'm usually really unaware of it. So even just going on a walk helps me understand, oh my goodness, my shoulders are really tight today because I carried all of my stress in my shoulders today. It can kind of help you make like a mental inventory of just what's going on in your body and what you need to do to make some adjustments.
That's good.
Oh, totally.
That's really good.
And then the last one you wrote down is just fasting. And we don't have any time to discuss why that's so powerful and beautiful, but just very simple. Like we are not chained to our body. Like our bodies are not inherently evil. This isn't Gnostic theology. Is that not Gnostic?
I mean, Gnosticism says that the physical material world is evil.
Yeah. And so there's this, I mean, you'll see it throughout the New Testament where Paul pushes back against this idea that the body is not evil. We're not saying that, but like, you have temptation and that comes, like you said, physically. And so fasting, whether it's from food or social media or TV or whatever you're called to fast to, that's a way of saying it's pushing back against the flesh in order to surrender. No. Surrender the flesh back to God's, what he's designed us to. So
that's good.
Maybe you need to fast this week.
Yeah, that's a couple of options for you to try. But yeah, go in grace, have fun. Peace out.
Peace.